There's a number that killed an innocent woman. 1 in 73 million. That was the statistic presented in a British courtroom in 1999 when Sally Clark, a solicitor and mother, stood accused of murdering her 2 infant sons. The prosecution's star witness, a renowned pediatrician, told the jury that the odds of 2 babies from an affluent, non-smoking family dying of SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome, were astronomically small. 1 in 73 million. Think about that number for a moment. It's smaller than your chances of being struck by lightning, smaller than winning the lottery. To the jury, it didn't feel like a statistic. It felt like mathematical proof of guilt. The evidence seemed irrefutable, scientific, clean. Here was a number that cut through all the messy emotions and uncertainties of a tragic case. No need to wrestle with doubt or complexity. The math had spoken. Sally Clark was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. But here's what the jury didn't know. That devastating statistic was built on a foundation of mathematical errors so fundamental that they would make a first-year statistics student cringe. The expert had squared the probability of a single SIDS death, a basic fallacy that ignored genetic predispositions running in families. He committed what statisticians call the prosecutor's fallacy, confusing the probability of the evidence given innocence with the probability of guilt given the evidence. The number wasn't fabricated. The expert wasn't lying. But the evidence, that cold, hard, seemingly objective piece of data, was catastrophically wrong. Sally Clark spent 3 years in prison for crimes she didn't commit. When her conviction was finally overturned, she never recovered from the ordeal. She died from alcohol poisoning in 2007, another casualty of evidence that lied. This isn't a story about one flawed expert or one tragic case. This is a story about something far more unsettling. In our data-saturated world, evidence itself has become a weapon. And most of us don't even know we're under attack. If a simple number can destroy an innocent life, how do we navigate a reality where we're drowning in charts, graphs, studies, and AI-generated proof? How do we make decisions when the very tools we've been taught to trust, facts, data, evidence, can be twisted into lies? These aren't comfortable questions, but they're the only questions that matter now. To understand how we got here, we need to go back to a time when evidence was supposed to save us. Picture the world of the 1600s. Truth came from 2 places, the church and the king. If you wanted to know how the world worked, you consulted scripture or you accepted what authority told you. Knowledge was handed down, not discovered. Reality was whatever the powerful said it was. Then came the Enlightenment, and with it, a revolutionary idea. What if we could figure out truth for ourselves? Francis Bacon gave us the scientific method. Observe the world, form hypotheses, test them, build knowledge brick by brick, evidence by evidence. No more taking anyone's word for anything. Show me the data. For centuries, this approach worked miracles. We cured diseases, split atoms, sent humans to the moon. The evidence-based worldview wasn't just an intellectual framework, it was a promise that humanity could reason its way out of superstition, ignorance, and suffering. We built entire civilizations on this faith. Courtrooms weigh evidence. Doctors follow evidence-based medicine. Voters, theoretically, choose leaders based on evidence of their competence. The modern world is a temple to empiricism, and data is our God. But what happens when you realize your God has been lying to you? The cracks started showing in the mid-20th century. Philosophers like Nietzsche and Foucault began asking uncomfortable questions. Who gets to decide what counts as evidence? Who funds the studies? Who chooses which questions to ask and which to ignore? They pointed out something obvious, yet radical. Evidence isn't neutral. It's always collected by someone, for someone, with particular interests and blind spots. The scientific method might be objective in theory, but it's practiced by humans with agendas, embedded in institutions with power structures. There are no facts, only interpretations. Friedrich Nietzsche had written decades earlier. The postmodern thinkers took this idea and ran with it. They showed how objective knowledge had been used to justify slavery, colonialism, and oppression. They revealed how supposedly neutral expertise often served to maintain existing hierarchies. This critique was meant to be liberating. If all knowledge claims are contextual and political, then marginalized voices could challenge dominant narratives. The oppressed could question their oppressors' facts. But here's the thing about intellectual dynamite. Once you detonate it, you can't control where the shrapnel goes. The postmodern critique of objective truth was supposed to empower the powerless. Instead, it created a permission structure for anyone to dismiss any evidence they didn't like. If all interpretations are equally valid, then your conspiracy theory is just as legitimate as peer-reviewed research. Your gut feeling carries the same weight as decades of scientific study. The tool designed to question authority became a weapon for authority to question everything else. We killed the god of reason, but we never found a replacement. We're left wandering in a wilderness of competing claims, each backed by its own evidence, each insisting it alone holds the truth. And into this vacuum stepped something far more dangerous than any dictator or false prophet: our own minds. Here's the problem we don't want to face. Even if we had access to perfect, unbiased information, we'd still get it wrong. The human brain isn't a computer processing data objectively. It's not even a scientist testing hypotheses fairly. The brain is a lawyer, and its only client is you, your ego, your tribe, your existing beliefs. This lawyer doesn't care about truth. It cares about winning. Think about the last time you searched for information online. Let's say you wanted to know if a political candidate you support was involved in some controversy. What did you type into Google? If you're honest, it probably wasn't "Is candidate X corrupt?" It was more like "Candidate X controversy debunked," or "Why candidate X scandal is fake news." You weren't looking for truth. You were looking for ammunition. This is confirmation bias in action, and it's not a bug in human psychology. It's a feature. For most of our evolutionary history, being wrong about whether your tribe was good or bad could get you killed. Being wrong about which berries were poisonous might end your genetic line. But changing your mind about your group's fundamental beliefs? That was social suicide. So we evolved brains that protect our beliefs like a mother protects her children. When confronted with evidence that challenges what we already think, we don't dispassionately evaluate it. We lawyer it to death. We find flaws in the methodology. We question the source's motives. We demand impossible standards of proof for claims we dislike while accepting flimsy evidence for claims we want to believe. And if all else fails, we simply ignore the inconvenient data and pretend it doesn't exist. But here's where it gets really disturbing. Sometimes, being presented with contradictory evidence makes us believe our original position even more strongly. Psychologists call this the backfire effect. Show a vaccine skeptic definitive proof that vaccines are safe, and they might become more convinced that vaccines are dangerous. The correction feels like an attack, triggering a defensive response that actually strengthens the false belief. This isn't stupidity. This is human nature protecting itself from the psychological trauma of being wrong about something important. Then there's the Dunning Kruger effect, the cruel cognitive bias that ensures the most confidently shared misinformation comes from people who know the least. A little bit of knowledge provides the illusion of expertise, short-circuiting the humility required for real learning. The person who spent 3 hours watching YouTube videos about climate science feels qualified to debate actual climatologists. The parent who read a blog post about vaccines thinks they understand immunology better than doctors. We're connected to billions of other flawed human brains, all running the same buggy software, all convinced they're the rational ones. And underneath all of this is perhaps the most powerful force in human psychology, our desperate need for stories that make sense. We are storytelling apes. We don't just process information, we weave it into narratives that help us understand our place in the world. And we will always prefer a compelling story that fits our worldview over a collection of dissonant, complicated facts. The Sally Clark case is a perfect example. Grieving mother secretly kills her own babies is a story the human mind can grasp. It has a clear villain, a clear motive, and a clear resolution. It fits ancient patterns we recognize from fairy tales and moral fables. Complex statistical anomaly combined with genetic predisposition and prosecutorial misconduct isn't a story. It's a mess of technical details that requires effort to understand and doesn't satisfy our narrative hunger. So when the pediatrician presented that devastating statistic, 1 in 73 million, he wasn't just offering evidence. He was offering a story that transformed a tragedy into a crime, chaos into order, uncertainty into mathematical certainty. The jury believed him not because they understood the math, but because the story felt true. This is the ghost in our machine. We think we're rational actors weighing evidence objectively, but we're actually emotional creatures desperately seeking stories that confirm what we already want to believe. And in 2025, that ghost has found the perfect haunted house. Imagine a machine designed to exploit every cognitive bias in the human brain. A system that could identify your deepest insecurities, your tribal loyalties, your secret fears and desires. A network that could then feed you a perfectly curated stream of information designed not to inform you, but to confirm your existing beliefs and keep you scrolling. You don't have to imagine it. You're probably using it right now. The algorithms that govern our information diet on TikTok, YouTube, X, Facebook, Instagram aren't designed to show us truth. They're designed to maximize engagement. And nothing engages quite like information that makes us feel smart, righteous, and afraid. These platforms have turned confirmation bias into a business model. Every click, like, and share teaches the algorithm more about what kind of information will keep you hooked. Over time, it builds a perfect echo chamber around you, a personalized reality where all the evidence seems to support your worldview and challenge your opponents. You think you're exploring the internet. Actually, the internet is exploring you, mapping your biases, cataloging your triggers, and feeding them back to you in an endless loop of validation. But the problem goes deeper than algorithmic manipulation. We're living through the collapse of context itself. Information no longer arrives as complete stories with beginning, middle, and end. It comes as fragments, a headline without the article, a 15-second video clip without the hours of footage that came before and after, a chart without axes or methodology. This decontextualization is where evidence transforms into lies. A real video clip can be used to prove anything if you do not know what happened before the camera started rolling. A genuine statistic becomes meaningless if you do not know how it was calculated or what it's being compared to. Take the explosion of do-your-own research as a cultural phenomenon. On the surface, this sounds noble. Don't just trust authorities, investigate for yourself. But in practice, doing your own research often means diving headfirst into a confirmation bias vortex. You start with a suspicion about vaccines, or elections, or climate change. You search for information, but the algorithm immediately identifies your bias and starts feeding you more content that confirms your suspicions. You find communities of like-minded people who share increasingly extreme versions of your beliefs. You encounter technical-sounding arguments that you don't fully understand, but that seem to support your position. Within weeks, you've researched your way into a completely alternate reality, complete with its own experts, its own studies, and its own internal logic. You feel like you've uncovered hidden truths that the mainstream is trying to suppress. The Dunning Kruger effect kicks in, and you become more confident in your conclusions than actual experts who've spent decades studying the subject. This isn't an accident. This is the system working exactly as designed, and it's about to get infinitely worse. We're entering the age of synthetic reality. Generative AI can now create fake news articles indistinguishable from real ones, deepfake videos that perfectly mimic anyone's face and voice, and fraudulent scientific studies that look legitimate to non-experts. For the first time in human history, we're moving from questioning the interpretation of evidence to questioning the authenticity of evidence itself. Soon, every piece of information will come with the shadow of doubt. Is this real? Or was it generated by an AI? The ultimate goal of modern propaganda isn't to convince you of an alternative truth. It's to exhaust you into believing that no truth is knowable. When everything might be fake, nothing has to be true. When every expert might be biased, no expertise has to be respected. When every source might be compromised, you might as well believe whatever feels right. This is what philosophers call epistemic nihilism, the belief that knowledge itself is impossible, and it's the perfect environment for authoritarianism to flourish. When people stop believing in the possibility of truth, they stop demanding it from their leaders. We're drowning in an infinite hall of mirrors, where every piece of evidence reflects our own face back at us, where every source confirms what we already suspected, where every search leads us deeper into our own assumptions. How do we find our way out? The answer isn't what you think it is. You might expect me to end with a solution, some new system for determining truth, some better way of evaluating evidence, some technological fix for our epistemological crisis. But that's exactly the kind of thinking that got us into this mess. The belief that somewhere out there is a perfect source of truth, if only we could find it. The assumption that uncertainty is a problem to be solved, rather than a condition to be managed. What if the solution isn't finding better evidence, but changing our relationship with evidence entirely? What if the most radical thing we could do in an age of weaponized information is to admit that we do not know everything, and that this is not a weakness, but a superpower? This is what philosophers call epistemic humility. It's not about being wishy-washy or indecisive. It's not about treating all claims as equally valid or retreating into relativism. It's something far more sophisticated and far more difficult. It's the active awareness of your own fallibility. Epistemic humility means decoupling your ego from your ideas. It means holding what venture capitalists call strong opinions, weakly held, being confident enough in your beliefs to act on them, but humble enough to change them when new evidence emerges. It means asking different questions. Instead of, "Is this true?" ask, "How would I know if this were false?" Instead of, "Who's right?" ask, "What would it look like if we were both partially wrong?" It means actively seeking out thoughtful disagreement, not to win arguments or prove your superiority, but to understand how intelligent people with access to the same information can reach different conclusions. Their reasoning might reveal blind spots in your own thinking. It means embracing the three most powerful words in the English language: I do not know. In an age of performative certainty, where every pundit claims to have all the answers and every algorithm promises perfect predictions, admitting ignorance is a radical act of intellectual honesty. But epistemic humility isn't just individual, it's cultural. We need to build institutions and norms that reward intellectual honesty over ideological purity. We need leaders who can change their minds without being seen as weak. We need experts who can communicate uncertainty without losing credibility. We need citizens who can live with ambiguity without demanding false certainty. This doesn't mean abandoning evidence-based thinking. It means upgrading it. It means recognizing that evidence is always incomplete, always filtered through human perception, always embedded in particular contexts and power structures. The goal isn't to be right all the time. That's impossible. The goal is to become slightly less wrong over time. Sally Clark's story haunts us because it shows how easily evidence can be twisted into a weapon. But there's another way to read her story, as a reminder that truth is fragile, provisional, and worth protecting from those who would abuse it. The post-truth era preys on our hunger for simple, certain answers. Our defense isn't to find better answers, but to ask better questions. To embrace complexity instead of demanding simplicity. To choose curiosity over certainty. In 2025, the most intelligent person in the room won't be the one with all the answers. It will be the one with the best questions and the humility to listen to the responses. Because in a world where evidence lies, the only honest answer might be the one that admits it doesn't know everything. And perhaps that's exactly the kind of honesty we need.